Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. There you go. It's all downhill from here, I'm afraid. Unlike with students, where I kind of make it as engaging as possible, I know that academics prefer all the kind of nitty-gritty stuff, so forgive me if there aren't enough pictures and animation in here. Just a little bit of background then about this research project. What's missing here are the colleagues whom I worked with, but I have got some handouts to pass around where you'll get to see their involvement and how they're involved in this project. So basically, just to kind of give you an overall idea, I'm going to be talking about final year projects, normally at undergraduate level for third year. So this isn't about postgraduate, okay? It's only about undergrads. And it's talking about, are dissertations, you know, still the ticket for undergraduate final years? Or is there room for a new kid on the block? So we undertook a project funded by the Higher Education Academy, which gave us a grant of £250,000. There were 6 of us in the team. I was with Professor Mick Healy, who was our head of teaching and learning, and used to work here, would you believe, was here for 12 years, something like that, 20 years. And a marvellous colleague to work with, quite inspirational. But he writes in a very academic way, whereas I tend not to, having a journalistic background. So I'm going to give you a journalistic take on the report that we've done for the HEA. It's in the process of being disseminated around all the HEIs, the higher education institutions around not just Britain but also abroad. And basically, we wanted to find out whether the dissertation is still worthwhile, you know, and fit for purpose, whatever that means. We'll get to that in a moment. And also looking at alternatives to dissertations. So we were very much looking at a project that was going to explore what is now and evaluate what is now and explore what comes up in the future. Now, the interesting thing is, some of you may be aware that you know, there's a political agenda as well surrounding dissertations. So yeah, I don't beat about the bush. I'm very kind of transparent about things like this. And you may be aware that the higher management of universities, as we move from an institution into a marketisation situation, much more operating like corporations, we have a senior management group called UUK, Universities UK. And some of you will know that that's where all the vice-chancellors get and have their annual jamboree and discuss all the kind of stuff that filters down to us via things like, I don't know, the Marshall Plan, for example. So all those kinds of things, they're quite political in that universities have to change. They have to keep up with new technologies, with modern ideas, and nobody would disagree with that. Everybody's embracing that. But some of the difficulty is that you've got traditional things like dissertations, which are very labour-intensive. And I'll say this quietly, but HR people, the people who pay the wages, the salary, the people who do all the finance and planning, they don't like dissertations because they're labour-intensive, and it takes much more of a member of staff's time to supervise and mark and double mark and even third mark dissertations than giving them a lecture theatre with 200 students is. You can do the maths yourself, so you know it's pretty straightforward. And it's probably fair to say that the reason that this research idea was given such a large amount of funding because there was a political agenda behind the scenes to find out whether dissertations, what the sea change, what the grassroots feeling is about disses. So we were sent off as a team of 6 to find out. There are flaws in our research, but on the whole, we came up with some interesting things, all mixed. There wasn't one complete conclusion, but that's what I'm going to present to you today. So you've probably all seen this one. This is, you know, why do we need to explore different types of final year projects? You could also use this for why do we need lots of different types of assessments. And it's because we know that students all learn in different ways, they assimilate knowledge in different ways, and they like to express themselves and disseminate their knowledge in different ways. And so when you see something like this, which you might argue is the old way, if you were at Oxford in the 50s, you'd have all done final year exams and no messing. There was no such thing as, you know, coursework. You might get to write a little essay and have a sherry, but mainly everything was final year exams, which of course is fine, but things have changed. The whole university landscape has changed. And so you can't have a one-size-fits-all policy, and that's what that is meant to portray. So when we think about dissertations, particularly the kinds of dissertations that all of us supervise, we do tend to have a fairly rigid structure a lit review, methodology, findings, interpretation. Let's have a nice intro and a conclusion. Let's have a nice list of refs at the back. It's all very one size fits all. So even though we all talk about, new ways of doing things, often we tend to cling on to what we know because it's easy, it's safe, it's straightforward, and the students quite like it. It's a comfort blanket for them as well. So, some of the evaluations that we carried out with lots of HEIs, we went around the country, and Mick Healy in particular, for those who know Mick, he's a bit of a jet setter, so he went all over the world. It's only him that managed to get the aeroplane flights. I don't know why that is, but anyway. He managed to go over to universities in North America, Japan, Canada, and Australia. Lucky thing. While the rest of us stayed at home and did all the donkey work in the UK. We didn't mind. It was great fun. So we went out to do a series of workshops. We did 30 in all across the country. I don't know why we didn't come to Coventry. That's weird. Don't know why. And we found that most staff and the students that we were able to get to through small focus groups that those staff had arranged for us, trying to get students together for a focus group without any incentive is quite difficult, as you know. But we found that there was total resistance in the beginning to, not that we were set out with any agenda setting other than the political reason for doing so, but we found a lot of resistance to anything other than a dissertation. It's still seen as a desirable gold standard of graduateness. Plenty of employers out there did their dissertation, and so you must do yours. And the students say, well, this is what we know. We know this word. It's a bit mysterious in the third year, but by the time we get to the third year, we know what we're doing. We want to do a diss. We want to have that bit of research to call our own. And so the dissertation, we found, is still seen as the gold standard in the UK in particular. Less so in North America and Australia. But in Japan and Hong Kong, still quite seen as the gold standard. So quite interesting, kind of cultural differences there. And we all know that it provides this apprenticeship for students who want to undertake research degrees. But we also found that there's so many different courses out there now. Courses don't come in straightforward single route packages anymore. We've all seen weird and wonderful courses, when we're out trawling the net in things, you can find courses in the most amazing things now. And sometimes it just doesn't work that they should write this lit review, methodology, findings, interpretation chapter. It just isn't going to work. They need to do something which is much more doing rather than writing. And I'm going to provide you with some examples of the kinds of things we saw. So this study then wanted to evaluate and explore. It wanted to evaluate, is the dissertation still fit for purpose? And what do we mean by that? What does that mean? One of those kind of phrases which doesn't seem to go anywhere. And if it isn't fit for purpose, or if there is room for this new kid on the block with all these weird and diverse courses, how can we say that a student, doing a study of cinemas and working in a cinema as a popcorn seller for 3 weeks and turns that into a final year project, how can we say that that's got any kind of academic rigour or credibility? So we didn't just look at case studies, what they did. We also went right through all their assessment briefs. We went through the criteria. We went through the marking. And we found some really interesting things. Not least that a lot of the creative alternatives were far more labour-intensive and required much more diligence, focus, hard work, actually, than the traditional dissertation, which made us wonder whether that's why the traditional dissertation is still so popular with some staff. Just to give you an idea, I'm sorry, you might have to share with the handouts. I hope you don't mind, but if you could grab one and pass those along.
If I had a working website, I could put them up there, but I don't know what's happening to it. So
If you got one there, that's it. Take those there. If you could you share, do you think? Would you mind? Can you grab one and share? There might be enough to go around singly. There's a single one there, enough for people to sit on their own. This is what you've got here. Would you grab one and pass it back? That's great. You'll pass that along. Thank you. What you've got here, this is part of our project, which I can provide full references for, but this Healy et al., if you look at the top, it says Rethinking final year projects and dissertations. Up at the top there, Healy et al. I'm one of the et al. I think I'm the last one on the row, actually. There's 6 of us, and I'm the last one. But this is an appendix from the report that we're putting together at the moment, which goes to the HEA. It's just going through its evaluation at the moment with our external stakeholders and consultants, and then that's going to be published. And then Mick will actually probably turn this, knowing Mick, he'll probably turn this into about 20 publications and a book as well. But he'll only put his name on it, but that's okay, because he did the bulk of the work. So this is just a short appendix piece to show you the kinds of things when we were evaluating dissertations and trying to understand what a final year project is, or as they call it in America and Australia, a capstone project, like the capstone on the top of the wall. We don't use that term so much here, do we? But they use it a lot in America. So we were trying to think, well, okay, what is the kind of evaluations, what viewpoints are coming forward about what students want out of their final year project, whether it's a dissertation or whether it's a creative alternative. So there's a little list there for you to digest at your leisure, all the kinds of things that students think they might like, what staff and academic institutions want, then on the second page, what employers want, what society wants. Quite pejorative, that, the way that's worded. I probably wouldn't have worded it quite like that, but you get the drift. Okay, somebody's missing their first page because I've got it here. Apologies for that. Okay. So those are the kinds of things that we wanted to study. And we found that the dissertation is still very much fit for purpose, in fact, because it hits all the buttons. It hits all the buttons of research-led inquiry. It requires diligence, requires intellectual capabilities. It requires all kinds of transferable employability skills. And I've got another handout here where it actually lists it out inside. I'm just going to pass these around as well because it's useful. No, I'm sorry, you really are going to have to share with these because they're quite weighty. But these have got all the case studies in, so you might need to share. My apologies for that. I can get more copies if anybody would like to ask me afterwards. If you go to page 4, for example, I'll read these out for those who haven't got a handout. Dimensions, thinking about, page 3, thinking about what does a dissertation need? Well, it needs to be relevant to a discipline. It needs to be underpinned by a range of relevant sources. It needs to be contextualised and show recognition of the provisional nature of knowledge. It needs critical thinking and evaluation. It needs to be clear what it's contributing. That's always quite difficult to do, making something very clear. It needs to be clearly defined. It needs a justified methodology. So we all know this. You know, the stuff in here is great to read and digest, but we all kind of know this already. So we evaluated dissertations and explored case studies looking at the alternatives. It was a 2-year study. We did all kinds of things. We organised national conferences which had an international flavour in that we used Skype. So we had some of our colleagues from North America, Australasia and Japan who also joined in on the big screen. We had a little Twitter feed there going on the side, which is quite trendy now at conferences. We had poster displays with all the academic posters of people who are halfway through their research and wanting to get viewpoints on their creative projects, their final year projects. So we did quite a lot of work trying to both evaluate the dissertation and see what was out there. And we found commonalities in both. So when we think about credibility of creative alternatives, and when we think about academic rigour, they weren't so very different. They might have been different in their aim, they might have been different in the way they were executed, and they might have been different in the way that they were finally expressed or disseminated. But they had commonalities across the whole range of effective communication, problem solving, critical thinking, being able to use all kinds of analysis inquiry and the kinds of technologies to improve their dissemination. Lots of innovation came out, and in the case study examples that you've got, we had something like 70 case studies in the end, and a few of the best ones are on that handout that you've got there. And you can go through those in your leisure and have a look and see if there's something that appeals to you that you think you might like to think, wow, you know, I could maybe do something like that for my course if you wanted to. The other commonality was they took the same kind of time and resources. In fact, in some areas like creative alternatives, they took more time. I actually did have a case study. My case study is in this document. Just to give you an example, mine's on page 8. It's 1.4, Advanced Newsweek, Work-Based Learning and Employability Skills for Student Journalists at the University of Gloucestershire. And what I did is I ran a newsroom. So these students had to dress in suits and they had to be in at 8. They had to work out their own staff rotas. They had to get permission to go out for lunch. They had to produce programmes across online TV and radio. And then at the end of each day, they self-assessed and peer-assessed their work. And by the end of the week, it was a 2-week series, by the end of the week, they chose their product to go forward for marking and then put in their own individual element of what they had done, complete with learning logs and diaries and artefacts and all the kinds of things that go with it, on top of reflective essay, a long reflective essay of 4,000 words. So that was the kind of case study that I dealt with. And the trickiest thing I can tell you now, the trickiest thing was the students absolutely loved it. But the trickiest bit was trying to get the assessment criteria through our quality standards panel. That I spent more time on that than possibly everything else. Quite rightly, really, because that's why we have, you know, the QAA, that's why we have quality standards. And you can imagine the ethics was quite tough because they're going out and about interviewing people. So we had to have plenty of risk assessment formed. You wouldn't believe the kinds of the build-up of workshops and information before we could let them out to act as real journalists in a real-world environment. So all of the commonalities exist across both creative alternatives and dissertations. I quite liked this one. This one's from the Media Studies unit at the Miami University, Ohio. And basically, the students basically acted as consultants. So they were redesigning websites. They were charging because they weren't taken seriously unless they did charge. And the money went in to help buy even better, more up-to-date kit so they could do even more innovative websites for their clients. And the handout is the one I've just given you, the big thick one, which has got loads of amazing case studies in. So please, in your spare time, and if you want more copies, please email me and I'll get you more copies. Have a look at some of the case studies, because there's some amazing stuff there. So to summarise then, looking at all the evaluations of dissertations and explorations of case studies and alternatives, and the summary is as long as your arm, but I'm just going to, so I've just cherry-picked, if you like, very unscientifically, just a couple of highlights that appealed to me, and I hope they appeal to you as well. Dissertations are still valid, very much so, very much so. This is not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as Mick Healy puts it. Dissertations are very valid, they're very desired. Employers like them, students like them, academics like them, so they very much are still a gold standard. We did find in certain places, and certainly on my course, I had both a dissertation and a creative alternative. So my students didn't have one final year project, they had 2, and both were double modules with 80 credits, and so 40 credits on both for 120 credit year. So quite tricky. If they were going to fail, they were going to have an awful lot of kind of reassessment to catch up on. And we had to build in alternative assessments, because if you're doing group work, your alternative assessment can only be something individual. So it's very tricky trying to work out all the criteria. But they were very much desired, and I don't imagine dissertations for 1 minute shouldn't be a gold standard. You know, it's there for a reason. It's tried and tested, and they're not that traditional, actually. You know, they've actually only been around about 40 years. They've not been there since, you know, the annals of time or whatever. They've actually been around. They're fairly contemporary as it is. They're not that traditional. They give students often their very first piece of work that they can call their own and be proud of, and can even give to employers and say, look at this. I had a student last year who did a dissertation about Newsround on CBBC channel. She applied to do a work placement with CBBC and Newsround up at Media City in Manchester. On the basis, they said, oh, well, we get thousands of applications. What's so different about you? And she said, I've done a dissertation all about the colours you use, the size of the news items, the way the presenters work, and I've done an actual content analysis of, you know, a year's worth of news rounds. They asked to see it, and off the back of it, she got a month's placement. and they've now asked her to go back. And she's about to start in October to do an MA in children's TV at Media City. I can see her working in it very much. She's very determined. She knows exactly what she wants her trajectory to be. So it was her first, this is all my own work, and it's actually opening up industry doors for her. So dissertations are no barrier to employability. Never were. They're brilliant. And you know, a lot of employers ask to see dissertations in industry if they feel it's relevant. They like to see them. But dissertations also have a particular place. If you're thinking about research protocol, research ethics, and you're thinking about structure and focus in an academic piece of work, then a dissertation is still a pretty good grounding for when you go into higher study like a master's. I'm being shadowed at the moment by a student who's doing a PhD at Warwick. She's been shadowing me doing the 200 DEL module to look at how we teach research methods at undergraduates. Because they don't do that at undergraduate level in Cyprus, Turkish Cyprus. They don't do that till they get to masters. So the very first time they even hear anything like data analysis is when they're at master's level. So it's quite interesting. I think the British standard is really interesting in that we give a really good grounding with the academic rigour that our undergraduates are expected to achieve by the end of their third year. It's a really good grounding for them to go into higher study if they wish. And if you've ever seen a business report, which I'm sure most of you have, they're not so very different. Maybe the language is a bit more straightforward, but it's not so different. A few more bullet points, a few more tables, pictures, graphs, that kind of thing. Very similar. Alternative projects are much more specific in terms of employability. Everybody talks about the transferable skills that, you know, studying for a degree gives you. Yes, of course, of course. But with alternative projects, you might actually specifically, if you want to be a journo, you might actually specifically go and, you know, work all week making a TV program. If you want to become a website designer, you might, if you're in Ohio, create a website. So, you know, it's much more specific, much more tailored, and it gives you an artifact, something tangible to take to an employer and say, here's what I've done. Not just that I've got a degree, but this is what I've actually achieved, this is what I've done. And they might look at it and go, crikey, that's better than what we do. So it's all useful in finding work. They can be designed with academic rigour. It's challenging, and part of the biggest challenge for universities moving into a new age is for quality standards and ethics committees, forgive me, to be much more open to facilitating change rather than that's the way we've always done it and we're not going to do it any other way. I can understand why quality standards committees do have problems with artifact-based subjects. But as long as the criteria and the marking and everything is done in a way that is transparent, open, and you can show the academic rigour through maybe reflective essays or industry-facing essays, that kind of critical analysis, then it's very, very doable. There's no barrier. The other thing is that with a lot of different kinds of courses, you can fit the aims. For example, if you're doing a life science, like some kind of biology plant genome project or whatever, you wouldn't expect to just write about it and never go into a lab and deal with some test tubes. If you're doing geology, you would expect to go out and do a field trip and come back with findings or soil samples or whatever it is that you're doing. You'd expect to have something tangible. And courses like teaching practice, things like that are no different. But instead of doing a DIS, if somebody wanted to put forward their own teaching plan where they've designed a whole course, there's no reason why that can't be equally as good or as important as a final year project. And this is a kind of byproduct, but it's a very important one in this day and age when we have to monetize everything. Excuse that horrible word, but that's how they refer to it out there. Knowledge transfer partnerships. This is the zeitgeist. You know, you'll see on every job spec now that you're supposed to either have some kind of, you know, be able to get research funding, hopefully, or be able to generate some kind of knowledge transfer partnership arrangement. And if you have students working in the community or mentoring, for example, or the nursing degree people, they go out into wards, teaching practice TEFL with the asylum, the refugee centre. All of these things can help to generate more money. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
I've got just a last handout. Forgive me for all these handouts. I don't normally, not normally quite so handout friendly, but there's just so much info on all of this. This is the key conclusions that were drawn out of this project. They're not as full as the report that we're writing at the moment, but they hopefully give you an idea of some of the things that we're discussing as part of what we're doing. So hopefully this one.
You know, we already have 3 types of different things students can do.
No, I wasn't actually, so this is all good for me actually. I should have asked, but I just haven't had time. Oh, in 200, yes, of course.
Family. They can do a portfolio of creative writing.
Oh, yes.
They can do a TEFL portfolio, which is teaching based.
Yeah.
Or they can do dissertations. We already have 3.
I did know that, of course. Yeah. And guys, Marina's quite rightly pointed out that we do have professional portfolios rather than a straightforward dissertation. So, I mean, we already offer an alternative final year project here. There's still so many areas that we could look at too. I don't know if anybody's got any ideas.
Can I just say, with the ethics, it's not me who decides, it's your mum.
I know.
Can I also say, though, we do have an issue with the professional TEFL portfolio that a lot of students tend to do their teaching before they clear the ethics. So whoever encourages students to do that portfolio as a teacher, I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah.
But if they're going abroad to teach, or if they're teaching in the summer,
Yeah.
they can't really do retrospective reflection. They have to clear ethics first.
Sure.
And these are our regulations, and not because I'm a maniac of. It's just.
I didn't for
Yeah.
1 minute.
And I have to sign.
If I looked at you, I apologise.
No, it's just you said, ethics. It's not my choice. It's me and Marshall.
Well, I was talking about Gloucestershire actually, because we had to get it through our ethics committee. They're not as bad as Coventry, I have to say. But
I'm trying to get us cleared of having to apply ethics to literature dissertation, but I'm not getting anywhere.
Space. I know I saw that in correspondence.
it's good to keep trying. It's good to keep trying. Has anybody got any ideas of any creative projects that they've worked on at other institutions, perhaps, or any ideas of things?
Well, my son was at Bristol, and he did something quite nice. He was asked to do a teacher-based dissertation on going to a school to design something for the kids there with the kids.
Great.
Instead of doing a dissertation, he did a portfolio practice of converting them to physics.
Yeah.
So he actually designed multimedia with the kids, and then wrote a reflective report, 6,000 words on it. So, and then he had to have, his mark was based on 40% the evaluation of the teacher of his performance with the kids,
Yes.
and 60% is
Critical
portfolio.
analysis. That's great. There's always got to be some kind of, written piece to go with the final year projects. If you look at the case studies, there's a couple of really interesting ones in here where they do actually. There's a lot of kind of things like teaching practice, but there are some really interesting ones in here. They had, if you look at page 10, you've got the entertainment technology dissertation at Staffordshire. They have the research disc, which is 30 credits, and then they've got their entertainment portfolio, they call it, of 15 credits. So that's effectively an artefact, like a documentary or something. These are all kinds of easy to do. There was a lot of talk at one stage about trying to find a way to do dissertations, get this, on the telly. So in other words, making a documentary of your research project rather than writing.
You read examples of that in law, where people had to produce a courtroom drama
Yes.
based on all the legal
Yes. I mean, it's wonderful stuff. You'd be amazed what you can do with the right kind of, sort of backing in terms of making sure you've got the kit. There's some really amazing kind of ideas. I mean, there's so many in here. There's another one here of a film school in Australia where they actually made a film. And there's just amazing stuff going on out there. I don't think it will be too long before you see in food technology degree, you see somebody setting up a shop and actually opening up a bakery or a cupcake shop or something. I can imagine that business and academic protocols will actually start to merge and mesh, and it will become almost indistinguishable. We normally think of kind of business reports as just, the kind of premise of the business, marketing, advertising kinds of courses. But more and more we're seeing them leach, particularly in masters and MBAs. Yeah.
I'm not sure where it was, but for languages, you can do this for long translation projects.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I have it in my mind. I can't exactly say where it is, but basically, Instead of making a 1,000-word translation,
yeah,
it's a translation of a short novel or something.
yeah, yeah.
And obviously it's not
What a
the
great
translation, but there
idea.
is the accompanying dissertation about the choices, the register, etc.
And you know, that's really interesting because very often somebody might be able to work in terms of reading and writing, but orally they find it difficult to be understood on occasions with accents and things. And you could do sort of translation audio, you know, projects, which could be quite useful.
Claire, can I ask,
Yes.
in terms of staff training, how do
Yeah.
the people do alternative things do in terms of training staff to be prepared to teach something alternative? Because, you know, you are the innovator, you probably will take risks like that takes to water. But from the point of view of somebody who used to manage 200 down, I already find it difficult to explain to people who have to supervise students the difference between a literature dissertation, a linguistics dissertation, a TEFL dissertation, a TEFL portfolio, a creative writing portfolio, or a languages dissertation.
Yeah.
So we have already seven different types of dissertations here. And I find sometimes people get to supervise something they're not sure about.
Yeah.
And I think, personally, we've never addressed it in terms of proper training. If you add to the portfolio, how do you cope with diversity in terms of training staff?
Okay, this was I'm glad you've raised that because when we came up, when we were doing the evaluations at the 30 workshops at the very beginning in our first year, it was a 2-year study, we were quite interested. We came in as objective observers, if you like, a bit of kind of ethnography, observing the discussions that were facilitated. And where we actually found hostility to the idea of doing anything other than a traditional DIS for that one single root course, because staff felt, you know, it's what they knew. And they felt that if you tried to make them think anything other than what they had already been doing and were comfortable with, it took them outside their comfort zone. And they did, believe me, begin to behave badly in those meetings. There were kind of, you know, we had to rein in quite a few heated conversations. Because academic staff are a different breed. You know, it is like trying to herd cats. You know, it's not like in business, in industry, where, you know, everybody necessarily kind of does what the boss says. You know, in academia, we are meant to be collegiate. We are meant to all have different views and ideas. But what I would say is that it's not so much about training, because the academics are there as academics, so they know what they're doing. It's more about the desire, the will, the desire to want to do something in a particular way. And you have to then make horses go with courses. You make the course fit the horse, if you like. So you wouldn't ask somebody to supervise a dissertation or work on methodology of a dissertation or research methods of a dissertation. That's outside their area.
There's a problem with creative writing. They're victims of their own success. And now we have 48 students who are doing creative writing portfolios and not enough staff who can supervise them. And this is creating tension, because it's actually come to me as course consultant as well. Some students, you know,
Yeah.
course actually a student rep raising this.
That's actually a management issue. That's for management to sit down and find the solutions to. I know how I would do it, but it's a management conversation.
There's a good case here for turnkey policy, you know, where, I mean, people can expand their skill sets quite readily, as long as they're given the confidence to do so. As long as they're given, you know, the confidence to do that. And I think you talk about somebody shadowing you now, somebody working with another person who is, let's say, an expert in creative writing. Well, you'd be amazed. I think that's what we all need to be doing anyway, is continually updating, upgrading, and expanding our own skill sets. This is what an academic is, in fact, I think.
I think in academia, we're all asked at times, aren't we, to come outside our comfort zone and mug up on something that we're not very familiar with. With me, my particular nemesis is new technology. So I kind of have this idea in my head that I've got to get to know my enemy. So I make it my business to do Twitter, to do filming and editing, so that I understand it and it doesn't become so, it doesn't scare me anymore. But I think if you're supervising third-year final projects, you do need to have mugged up or be skilled enough or confident enough that you can breed confidence.
Absolutely.
Otherwise the student knows, and then they lose confidence in you, and that brings down, sorry to say this, your NSS figures, and you don't want to do that.
We're a team. You know, we have a second-year module where students that this year, for the first time ever, have made films, have made documentaries, and done graphic novels, graphic documentaries.
So they could do that as a final year project.
When they get to the third year, say, can we do something similar for our dissertation, for our project, for our end-of-year assessment? And we need to be able to say yes. Now, I'm not an expert in filming. Tim knows a little far more. I can address some of the academic issues about narrative, etc., etc. Tim can do the stuff with filming. And together, I think we've got a ready-made partnership to work at that level.
Two things there. The first thing is that when I did the Newsweek with TV, radio and online, we team taught, so even though I can do all three mediums, I simply didn't have time to get 40 students through each of those mediums. So one tutor did radio, one did TV, one did online. The biggest problem with thinking like next year they could do documentaries as a final year project, which is a great idea, and some people are doing it, it's working really well, is it's going to probably, thinking about the way Coventry works for a moment, it's probably going to take you more than a year to get that through the processes. So that's the only thing, is start in advance. You know, it's quite difficult to get the quality assurance and all that kind of stuff, get the curriculum developed, because it affects your programme specs. You have to send out focus groups, you have to get your external examiner on board, and all this kind of stuff takes time. It's a bit like wading through treacle. So my top tip is start early if you've got an idea of innovating. But it's great ideas. Look, I love all that. I mean, there's so many different things that people can do. It's amazing.
On the other hand, I mean, you did your focus of your interviews. I also find that a lot of employers still say they want to see the dissertation. Did you find
They
that?
do. We did. And in fact, I couldn't believe it. I had one of my students who'd done a radio documentary. I sent her off to the local BBC radio station. And the first thing the managing editor said was, instead of saying, let me hear your documentary, he said, where's your dissertation? So, you know, you can't win them all. Do you know what I mean? And this certainly wasn't a project arguing against the dissertation. This is very much, we've set out to explore. We knew that there might be a slight political agenda, which is why we got the money. But we set out to be as objective and have as much integrity as possible during the course of our methodology. So in evaluating the dissertations, we tried to remain as objective as possible. And we did find that, you know, dissertations, you know...
I reported, because I knew about your research, I read online about it, I reported to the students and said, when you decide dissertation or portfolio, have a look around the area where you want to go, what employers want. And of course, it came a complaint, of course, consulting. I told them not to do a portfolio. I didn't say that.
No.
I just said, just see where you want to go.
Yeah.
Because it's just reality that a lot of employers prefer dissertation.
Now, here's a model for the future, then. Here's something to think about for the future. Employers, because some of them did a diss themselves and they want to see a diss because it's what they know, it's their comfort blanket. Great. But how about we move towards, we don't have to, but how about we move towards a model where you give the student more choice to choose either or, and they start to become the employers, you know, and then slowly either or becomes the norm. And there's different ways of presenting dissertations as well. It doesn't have to be, you know, a linear piece of, it could be web-based, where you click the content where you want it to go, just like we do now with the way we use the internet. There's all kinds of different ways of presenting a dissertation than just on a piece of paper in a linear way. It takes time and effort, though. But, you know, if the will is there, I'm always sure there's the way. Does that... Any other...
How common is the gold standard you refer to it as?
In the UK...
In the UK,
it takes... Yeah, in the UK, there is a figure in the actual report, so it's something like 75% of courses have dissertations. But, I mean, I think...
As a compulsory
Yeah,
component?
as a compulsory component. In fact, it might even be slightly more. There was about 15% of students are given a choice between either or. There was about 2% get both. Like my course that I was head of, we offered both. They did both at the same time. I had a diss and a project. But I think it's changing. As alternative kind of ideas come forward, that figure I think we'll see maybe kind of plateauing out to about sort of 60-40. That's only projection, that's not scientific. But yeah, but I think dissertations are gold standard, and quite rightly so, for all sorts of reasons. But it's to say that there is a choice, and that there are other ways of doing it. The oranges are not the only fruit, you know, type thing.
I mean, I think that they are a relatively recent arrival anyway, and the fact that they've come along and taken that place
So quickly.
suggests strongly that other things could evolve.
Yeah. Although I think it's been a decade. I think it's been...
I didn't do a dissertation.
Yeah,
I think they had them when I was
No, well,
university.
Yeah.
I did, but I
Cambridge
did
is
my,
something.
That's what I was saying. They didn't have them, but 30, 40 years ago, they didn't have them. Sorry, Sheena. So they're not quite as traditional as we think they are. They're actually quite contemporary. And all these kinds of projects have been coming through. There's been a lot of innovation in Australia. And it's been coming through in the last 10 years. So the last decade is when we started to really start to see some of these alternative projects come forward. And for me, the weird thing is that I'm still calling it alternative. I'm like, it makes it sound like some kind of weird kind of, fringe thing going on over there. It's not. It's just finding a different way to differentiate it from dissertation. It's a final year project that's not a dissertation in the traditional sense of the word, as we see them.
However, if they want to go on to masters,
Yes.
there's no doubt.
Yeah.
The majority of people want a dissertation.
They do. And you know something? When I did my masters, I'm so glad I did do a dissertation, because I could hit the ground running. If I'd had to be like this Turkish Cypriot PhD student who didn't even know about research methods until she started her master's, she was already writing an essay. She had some crazy 5-week deadline to write a 3,000-word essay as one of the modules, and she'd never done any referencing. No referencing. She'd never used any validation of anything. So I said, well, how did you write your essay? She said, well, we just wrote about what we thought. So you wrote a blog. That was a blog. It's not an essay, is it? I don't know. Oh, it's great stuff, probably really interesting to read. But it's not an essay, is it? If you haven't got references, not really.
Don't cut this off when you do the recording. You said you've got a PhD student starting 200.
No. This is somebody who's at Warwick.
Exactly.
And she's
they're
shadowing
coming
me here.
Shadowing here.
Yeah.
Because they don't have anything like 200 at Warwick. Sorry, I know that Warwick are very fast at catching up on our ideas. So you've got
They don't teach
copyright.
research methods
They
at
do not.
undergraduate level
They
at
do not.
Warwick.
She's not in a department that teaches
They
undergraduate
do not do
students.
undergraduate research at Warwick. No, they don't.
Gosh,
You know,
blimey.
confirmed by Monica from she would.
You know some as well.
No, we never got a research method.
You know.
University.
No. I'm sure you're right, actually.
Claire,
I'm sure you're right.
200 is very innovative, which is why they asked me for a case study on it.
Well, I don't know, because, we've been doing it at Gloucestershire for
I know,
years.
because Nick is from Wollongong.
Yeah.
As a concept, it's new, it's Paul who've done
Yeah.
this. In old unis, they don't have a research message module.
Well, it is interesting because when our students go on to do their masters, because I also set up a master's course at Gloucestershire, when they came on to do their masters, of course, we didn't have to waste too much time on research methods because they'd already done it. The only thing we did do is we did give them SPSS, which we didn't give at undergraduate level. So maybe, social statistics program for social sciences. It's a software to sort out frequencies, crosstabs, that kind of thing, on quantitative content analysis. Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, Sheena.
We looked at undergraduate assignments across 4 different universities and collected them, and one of the things that I was quite surprised at was that there were a lot of extended essays. They were just sort of 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 word essays.
Yeah.
They weren't, and I don't know, did you come across those and would you classify those? Did you sort of figure out, is that a dissertation or is it an essay? Does it matter if there's, is there a difference?
Yeah. When as part of our evaluations, we did come across this. We came across the not so problematic, but it was certainly raised discussion, was the definition of a dissertation. And there are different definitions across countries as well as universities. And a lot of people think they're doing a diss when in fact it depends on your own definition, because a definition is only such if it's kind of written down, in a booklet or in a module guide or something. It doesn't become a tangible thing until somebody writes it, and makes it real. But certainly there is, in my view, a clear difference between a long extended essay and a diss, and it's all about the structure.
Choosing the topic, independence.
Yeah.
In a dissertation,
Yes.
you decide what you want.
Yes. But I did see some extended essays where they'd chosen their own title, but then they just wrote it and they didn't justify any kinds of methodologies or carry out any primary research. They just used secondary sources. So I figured that if you're going to find a way to differentiate, in my view, and this is only my view is not the only view, I'm sure you've all got your own ideas, but in my view, a dissertation was different if it had the student's own bit of research that they could humbly offer up to the research community and say, look, I did this. I know it's only teeny tiny, but I did this. rather than just writing about the sources that they found. So there was a discussion about what is a dissertation. And we felt it was fairly clear. We make it clear in our report, which when it's published I'll send the link out. But we made it clear that for the purposes of what we were doing, we defined a dissertation as having the methodology, having a piece of research in it, whereas an essay, an extended essay, they might choose a title, but they're just using 6,000 words of kind of commentary and using sources to validate.
We did a sort of, I guess, an extended essay in instrumental or experimental phonetics.
Oh yeah.
And that's involved doing an experiment. But I mean, it was chocolate on the tongue and stuff, or whatever you wanted to do. But I mean, it was part of an instrumental phonetics module, so it was an essay. So the dissertation is part of a module which is called dissertation. I mean, it has that name on the module, so
Yeah.
That's normally how I would have expected it to be defined.
Yeah, I'm with you on that actually.
My essay that I wrote for instrumental phonetics wasn't kind of anyone's book,
Yeah.
a dissertation at any point. But I mean, by your definition now, then I suppose I could have been said to have done two dissertations.
Yeah, exactly. It is strange how different it is, and it can change within a university as well. It's probably true in Coventry that a different faculty does things in a very different way, but calls it the same thing. You know, I'm sure there are differences, similarities, contrasts.
Yeah, can I just say Dean can go because I promised him we'll go by 5, so you can go, Dean, for discussion. Yeah. So thanks. But yeah,
Thank
we can
you.
carry on with the question, yes.
Just one quick one. The other sort of main category that